Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
All right, so today we're going to be diving into a book. And, I always like to look at what Bill Gates is reading.
Yeah.
And this one's on his 2024 winter reading list, so it must be good.
Oh, very cool.
The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And it's all about this idea that has been floating around that young people today are so much more anxious than previous generations.
Yeah, it seems like almost every week there's a new article or study highlighting, just how much anxiety and depression are impacting young people. And Haidt, in his book, really tries to dig into, what is going on here? Is it just smartphones, or is there something bigger at play?
Yeah, because I think that's kind of the easy answer, right? They're on their phones all the time.
Exactly.
But he's bringing in all these other perspectives, like psychology, sociology, even ancient philosophy.
It's a really interesting blend of disciplines.
So what is he saying? How does he approach this?
Well, he starts off with a pretty shocking statistic. He says that around 2012, rates of depression and anxiety in teens just skyrocketed.
Really?
Yeah, we're talking about a 150% increase.
That's a lot.
It is, and it's not just an American thing either.
Oh,
this is happening globally in developed nations.
Well, not just a cultural thing, it's something bigger.
Exactly. It's like something fundamental has shifted.
So what does he think is behind this massive spike?
Well, he used this really interesting analogy.
Okay.
He compares growing up in today's hyper-connected world to being like the first generation raised on Mars.
On Mars.
Yeah, he calls it the great rewiring of childhood.
Okay, I'm already hooked.
And he argues that there are two major phases to this rewiring.
Ooh, two phases. So we got to break this down a little bit. Phase one, tell me about it.
All right, so phase one starts back in the late 1980s.
Okay.
With the rise of what Haidt calls safetyism.
Safetyism.
Yeah.
I've heard that before, but I don't really know what it means.
Yeah, so it's basically this idea that we started overprotecting children, shielding them from any potential risk or harm.
So instead of letting kids climb trees,
exactly,
and maybe skin their knee, we're like, no, you have to be inside and be safe.
Right, and it's not that safety isn't important. Of course it is.
Of course.
But Haidt's argument is that by removing all risk and challenge from kids' lives, we've inadvertently made them more fragile, less able to cope with setbacks.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, because it's you don't learn how to deal with failure.
Exactly.
If you never fail.
And when you do inevitably encounter failure, because let's face it, everyone does,
right, you're
not equipped to handle it.
Yeah, so you're saying this kind of started in the late 80s?
Yeah, that's when you started to see this shift.
And what about phase two?
Yeah.
I'm guessing this is where smartphones and social media enter the picture.
You got it. The early 2010s saw this explosion of smartphones and social media.
It seems like it happened overnight.
Right. It was really rapid. And Haidt argues that this was a major turning point.
Okay.
He describes it as a shift from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood.
Right.
And with that shift came some pretty serious consequences.
And I think he outlines those in what he calls the 4 foundational harms of excessive screen time.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get a little bit darker.
All right, lay it on me. What are these harms?
So the first one is social deprivation.
Okay, that makes sense. Less face-to-face interaction.
Right. Less time spent hanging out with friends in person. More time spent online.
Okay, so that one's pretty straightforward. What about the others? I'm curious about sleep deprivation.
So it's true that teenagers are kind of naturally prone to staying up late.
Right, it's like a biological thing.
But Haidt emphasizes that the blue light emitted from screens actually messes with melatonin production.
Oh, so it makes it harder to fall asleep.
Exactly, and then you add in the constant notifications, the fear of missing out.
Right, you're constantly checking your phone.
It creates this recipe for chronic sleep deprivation.
And I bet that just feeds into the anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. Lack of sleep can really exacerbate anxiety and depression.
So it's not just teens being teens, it's actually a physiological issue.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the last 2 harms?
So the third one is attention fragmentation.
Attention fragmentation, what's that?
This idea that constantly switching between apps and feeds is actually changing the way young brains develop.
Really?
Yeah, they become less able to focus on a single task for extended periods.
Oh, wow.
Which can impact learning, creativity, even relationships.
I could definitely relate to that. I feel like my own attention span has shrunk since I started carrying a smartphone everywhere.
It's like we're constantly bombarded with stimuli.
Yeah.
And it's hard to filter out what's important.
Okay, and then the 4th harm is addiction.
Right. Yes, addiction. And this is where Haidt makes that powerful comparison between social media apps and slot machines.
Slot machines. That's an interesting comparison.
He argues that the unpredictable reward system of social media.
Like when you get a like or a comment?
Exactly. It triggers that little dopamine rush, and it's designed to keep you coming back for more and more.
Even if it's not actually making you happy.
Exactly. It's like a cycle that can be really hard to break free from.
That's a pretty disturbing thought, that we're all just being played by these apps.
And it's not just social media, right? This kind of addictive design is present in all sorts of technology.
Right, like video games.
Exactly. But what makes social media particularly potent is that it taps into this very primal social need for connection and belonging.
Right, we're social creatures. We want to feel like we're part of a group.
Exactly. And social media can kind of exploit that need.
So we've got these 4 foundational harms, and they're all playing out during this really critical period of brain development, right?
Exactly. Puberty is a time of massive neural pruning and myelination.
So the brain is like undergoing a major renovation.
Exactly. And Haidt's point is that all of this stress from social comparison FOMO, all of that can actually interfere with that crucial rewiring process.
So it's not just that these harms are making teens feel anxious in the moment. They could actually be having long-term effect.
Exactly. And that's why understanding these foundational harms is so crucial.
Right. It's the first step in figuring out how we can help young people navigate this increasingly complex digital world.
Absolutely.
I'm definitely starting to see why this book is making such a big impact.
Yeah, it's a real wake-up call.
But I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
I hear you. It can be a lot to process.
It's like a lot of bad news.
But don't worry, Haidt doesn't just leave us with a pile of doom and gloom.
Okay, good, because I need a little bit of hope here.
He actually lays out a roadmap for collective action, and that's what we'll explore next.
Okay, so there's hope.
There is hope.
All right, I'm ready for that. Let's dive into those solutions.
Let's do it. So we've talked about, some of the challenges that young people are facing today, but the good news is that Haidt doesn't just leave us there with all the bad stuff.
Yeah, I was starting to get a little bit depressed.
Yeah, it can be heavy, but he offers some solutions, a vision for how we can move forward.
Okay, good. So where do we begin? What needs to change?
Well, he believes it requires a collective effort.
Okay.
From governments, tech companies, schools, and parents.
So it's not just one group's responsibility.
No, it really takes a village.
Okay, so let's break it down. What does he suggest governments do?
He argues that governments need to step up and set clearer boundaries.
Boundaries.
Protect children from the more harmful aspects of the internet.
Like what kind of boundaries are we talking about?
Well, one of his more controversial suggestions is raising the age of internet adulthood to 16.
16. So no social media until you're 16.
Essentially.
That's a pretty big change.
It is. It's like treating social media like alcohol or driving.
Right, things that require more maturity.
Exactly, because adolescent brains are still developing.
Right.
They're particularly vulnerable to the addictive nature of these platforms.
But how would you even enforce that? Like, how do you keep kids off social media?
He suggests a few things, like device-based verification.
Okay, so parents could kind of block certain things.
Yeah, parents could mark their child's device as belonging to a minor.
Interesting.
And then websites and apps could use that information to restrict access.
Okay, so it would require cooperation from the tech companies.
Absolutely. And speaking of tech companies, Haidt has some pretty strong words for them.
I bet he doesn't hold back.
No, he's very critical of how many tech companies prioritize profit over user well-being.
Yeah, it's all about engagement.
Exactly. And he argues that their business models are designed to keep us hooked, even if it's not good for us.
Right, like that slot machine analogy.
Exactly. They're designed to trigger those dopamine hits.
It's scary how effective it is.
It really is. And so Haidt proposes that we need regulation to hold these companies accountable.
So what kind of regulation are we talking about?
He proposes establishing a legal duty of care.
Duty of care. What does that mean?
Basically, it would hold tech companies responsible for the harmful effects of their products on children.
So if a child is being cyberbullied or develops an addiction to social media,
the tech company could be held liable.
Wow, that would be a huge shift.
It would, but he argues that we've seen similar shifts in other industries.
Like where?
Like food safety and automotive safety.
Right, regulations have made those products safer.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that with great power comes great responsibility.
So regulation for tech companies, but what about schools? What can they do?
Haidt sees schools as having a huge opportunity to create healthier digital habits.
Okay, how so?
One of his main suggestions is going phone-free.
Phone-free schools. I can imagine that would be met with a lot of resistance.
Yeah, probably from students and even some parents.
No, because it's like a security blanket for some people.
But he argues that creating these tech-free spaces is essential for fostering focus,
Okay.
encouraging real-world interaction, and allowing students to develop social skills.
So it's not just about reducing screen time.
No, it's about creating space for other types of learning and engagement.
And I bet it ties back into that safetyism idea, too.
Absolutely. Schools could be these environments where kids can practice navigating social situations.
Right, dealing with conflict, building resilience.
Exactly. And he also talks about the need to re-engage boys.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask about that because it seems like boys are struggling in different ways.
Yeah, they're falling behind girls academically. And Haidt argues that traditional school environments often don't cater to their learning styles.
So what does he suggest we do about that?
Well, he suggests a few things, like hiring more male teachers,
Okay.
providing more vocational training options, and moving away from this heavy emphasis on standardized testing.
So basically offering more diverse learning experiences.
Exactly, recognizing that one size doesn't fit all.
Okay, so we've talked about governments, tech companies, and schools. That leaves parents. What does he say about their role?
Haidt believes that parents have a crucial role to play in shaping their children's relationship with technology.
Which I imagine is no easy task.
It's definitely a challenge, but he emphasizes the importance of setting clear boundaries around device use.
Okay, like time limits, no phones at the dinner table.
Exactly, and also creating tech-free zones in the house.
Like a no-phone zone in the bedroom.
Exactly, and encouraging activities that foster creativity, social interaction, and real-world exploration.
So it's about being intentional about how we use technology.
Absolutely, and also modeling those healthy habits ourselves.
Right, because kids are always watching.
Exactly, and he also recommends delaying social media as long as possible.
Okay.
Ideally until age 16.
To protect them from the pressures of social comparison.
Right, cyberbullying, all of that.
That makes sense. But it's hard because there's so much pressure for kids to be on social media.
It is, but Haidt reminds us that we have more power than we think.
To shape our children's digital experiences.
Exactly.
So this whole idea of collective action, it's very compelling, but is it really realistic to expect all these different groups to work together effectively?
That's a great question, and one that Haidt doesn't shy away from. He acknowledges that achieving this level of coordinated action will be incredibly challenging.
It does seem like a really daunting task to get all of these groups together to actually make these changes happen.
It is, it's a huge undertaking, and, Haidt doesn't pretend like it's going to be easy.
Yeah.
But he does offer a little bit of hope.
Okay, good.
He thinks that change is possible, but it requires a pretty big shift in our mindset.
Okay, so what kind of shift are we talking about?
Almost like a social movement.
A social movement. Okay, so how do we create a social movement around this?
Well, he sees a few encouraging signs already starting to emerge.
Like what?
Well, first, there's just growing awareness of the problem.
Yeah, and seems like people are starting to talk about it more.
Right. More parents, educators, and even some tech leaders are starting to sound the alarm about, the downsides of too much screen time.
Especially for kids.
Exactly. And that's really important because it's that kind of widespread recognition that can lead to change.
Right, you have to acknowledge the problem first.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that we're starting to see some pushback against the status quo.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Like the movement for phone-free schools or the growing popularity of digital detox programs.
I've even seen retreats where you go and you lock up your phone for a weekend.
Exactly. And these are great examples because it shows that people aren't just passively accepting things.
Right. They're actually trying to do something about it.
Exactly. And these grassroots efforts are so important because they can create pressure for bigger changes.
So it's like a bottom-up approach.
Exactly. And Haidt believes that changing social norms is a really crucial part of this process.
So it's like how it used to be normal to smoke on airplanes?
Exactly. And then the social norm shifted, and now it's unthinkable.
Right.
And once that norm shifted, it was much easier to implement policies.
So we need to see a similar shift with excessive technology use.
Exactly. It can't just be a few individuals making changes. It has to become the expected behavior.
So how do we make that happen? How do we shift social norms around something as pervasive as technology?
Well, Haidt believes that parents have a huge role to play here.
Okay, so what can parents do?
They can model healthier habits by limiting their own screen time.
So like practice what you preach.
Exactly. And they can create a home environment where technology is used intentionally.
Not just mindlessly.
Right. And he also talks about the importance of delaying social media for as long as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Ideally until age 16.
But I know a lot of parents struggle with that.
It is tough, but it's about protecting kids from those pressures of social comparison.
Right, and cyberbullying.
Exactly. And he also talks about the role of tech companies.
Okay, so what about them?
He thinks they need to be held accountable through a combination of regulation and innovation.
So like a two-pronged approach.
Exactly. So governments need to step up and create stricter rules.
Like around data privacy.
Right. Age verification and the use of manipulative design features.
So kind of reining them in a little bit.
Exactly. And he's a big advocate for that duty of care concept we talked about earlier.
Right, holding them responsible for the well-being of their users.
Exactly. But it's not just about regulation. He also emphasizes the importance of innovation.
So coming up with better solutions.
Exactly. He's really excited about what he calls humane technology.
Humane technology.
Yeah, so these are apps and platforms that are actually designed to promote well-being.
So instead of exploiting our weaknesses.
Exactly. They're designed to help us thrive.
Okay, so there are people out there trying to create these better alternatives.
Absolutely. And Haidt believes that young people have a huge role to play in this movement as well.
Yeah, because they're the ones who are using this technology every day.
Exactly. They have the power to demand better, more ethical products.
So it's not just about adults telling them what to do.
No, it's about empowering them to shape the future of technology.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about Haidt's approach is that it's not anti-technology.
Right. He's not saying we need to throw away our phones and live in a cave.
It's more about finding a balance.
Exactly. Being mindful about how we use technology and making sure it serves us.
Not the other way around.
Exactly. And that's a message that really resonates with me.
Me too. And I think it's a message that a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of feeling overwhelmed by technology these days.
And we're looking for ways to take back control.
Absolutely. And that's what Haidt's book offers. It offers a roadmap for how we can do that.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
No, there's definitely hope. And I think that's what's so important about this conversation.
Yeah, it's about recognizing the challenges, but also feeling empowered to create a better future.
Exactly. And I think that's a great place to leave it.
I think so too. Share your thoughts in the comments, keep the conversation going, and don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.